All right, so today we're going to be talking about station maintenance, and this is equally as important as the actual installation itself. For our network to be running properly and for us to continuously get data, we need our stations to be working and we need them to be operating at the highest quality that they can. And so today we're going to walk through a whole bunch of things. Um, and I hope everyone kind of takes away as much as they can from this and applies it to their own stations that they are maintaining. And I will start by saying um, a lot of this station maintenance can, very easily be mitigated and assisted by how you install the station in the first place. So if we install it properly and we make sure that we are um, making sure that we are installing with highest quality materials, we're making sure that we're doing it with a 10-year lifespan in mind, it reduces the amount of maintenance that we have to do in the long run. So sort of broad points to start off with each maintenance visit. The first thing is that the more often you visit, the less you have to fix and the better it's going to be working, especially if this is something that is, say, at your office or at least in the neighborhood of where you're living. It's easy access. We recommend a minimum each year for every Motus station, at least 1 to 2 maintenance visits a year, preferably before spring and fall migration. The reason we're kind of talking about this now is January, February, March is a perfect time to go out and maintain your stations here in the Southeast, right before spring migration. You've had the past year of the summer and then the winter to make sure, see what sort of damage it's undergone. So the more often you can visit it, you're typically dealing with less problems, the more on top of things you can be. And it makes your life a lot easier. Another point is that every time you do a maintenance visit, check everything. Don't just go and check one thing and then wait to check the other thing the next time. Do a full check, and that includes keeping records of, taking photos, keeping a list of everything that needs to be fixed. And at the end of my presentation, Todd is going to take over and going to show everyone a survey 123 that he made for the Northeast Motus collaboration that we're going to be implementing for the Southeast. And that is going to provide you a list that you go through and you check off everything. So we're going to provide a platform for you that is already pre-made and gives you everything that you need to be checking anyways. So by using that, you can check that each time. A maintenance visit shouldn't be a full day's work. It can be as much as or as little as a 20 to 30-minute inspection to make sure everything is running well. So the more often you're able to get there, the more notes you're able to keep, the better everything is kept organized. So keep those things in mind every time we go out. But before we go out, there is one thing I kind of want to emphasize that we can check uh, with our station, especially if it is connected to Wi-Fi, Ethernet, or cell data, where we can constantly look at our uploaded data, is to look online and check for a few things that might indicate problems that we know that we should go check when we're doing our maintenance visit. So the way to do that, whether you have a sensor station or a sensor gnome, it doesn't matter. The data will look pretty much the same. You go to your project on motus.org, manage stations, and then you select your station, whether it be on the map or on the table. And on the right-hand side there, you'll see your station pop up. You just scroll down to the side there after it gives you a few other points of information, and we're going to select receiver timeline. And the receiver timeline is basically showing us what data has been uploaded, what has been received, and from that we can again infer a couple different problems. We can diagnose a few problems before we even go out, which I highly recommend doing every time. It's also just good to check on this, even if you're not planning on doing a maintenance visit, just to make sure, yeah, I'm getting everything that I need. So you'll see at the top of the receiver timeline, you'll see basically a summary of all the different things that it's recording. you'll see the GPS data, and then you'll see a tab that says all ports, and then selectively port 1, port 2, L1, L2. So that's going to relate to your, if you have a port 1 that is your antenna 1 that is plugged into port 1 on a sensor node, or a USB port on the sensor station. And then L1, L2, those are the integrated sensor station 434 ports. And so what the summary is less important than the actual. You go below that and you can scroll through the entire calendar year, and each line is a single day. So we can see here, this is data starting on January 1st this year. This is one of my stations here in Georgia. And the second line is the second, the third, the fourth, etc. And so what this is showing us is a couple different things. So the first, those blue lines are GPS fixes. So that means it's uploading GPS data. Having those blue lines more or less tells us that the sensor station, that our receiver is on and it's connected and it's uploading that data. So that's the first thing. If it's just empty white, there's a problem. The second thing is that you'll see the gray shading from different ports within each of those bars. So you can either, I typically leave it on all ports selected, but you can also select either just a single port if you're interested. And our 166 megahertz are low-tech antennas. Those are going to, or should be, consistently detecting things throughout the day. Even if it's not very noisy site, there will typically still be something that activates that antenna to where it's going to upload data. So we should expect the blue dashes of our GPS to be underlined by that gray coloration. If it gets too dark gray, that means there's a lot of 166 data being uploaded, and that might indicate that there's a lot of noise that you're having to deal with. Conversely, our 434 data, if you remember about us talking about noise, 434 does not suffer from the same kind of noise. And so we're going to get more occasional blips rather than solid gray. So we shouldn't expect many points of data points from our 434 ports, if that makes sense. So, for example, to show you what a problematic bar graph of our receiver timeline would look like, here is from last year in the middle of November. I have a sensor station. Each day it is at least producing blue, so we know that the GPS is being fixed. We know that the station is on, it's uploading data properly. That's good. But you can see that the underlying gray, so that our 166 antenna data, it's on for a little while, and then all of a sudden for a big chunk, there's white. There's no antenna activity. And so what that tells me in the middle is that our fun cubes and our 166 antennas were kicked off for a bit. And then after a few reboots, about a little over a week later, they were brought back on. This was a common bug that was found in the older sensor station disk image. So this I knew we could fix with reflashing a new disk image, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And it's probably one of the most important things if you have a sensor station. So this was a common problem. And what this means is that there's periods of large chunks of time that the antennas were not working and they were not uploading data. So that means we're potentially missing birds that are passing by. So we want to make sure we fix that. If you see that we have antenna data and then it's been months and months since any antenna data has been uploaded, and it's just been that blank white with the blue on top, that means that there could be an actual physical disconnection of our antennas, that whether it be the actual connection or coax has gone bad. That, again, shows us something's not working and we're not getting data. And we can automatically tell that without even having to visit the station. And then the other situation that has happened before is we see, so in this example, we see a station where it has the dark gray underlining and the blues at the same time. So we know there are periods of time that the GPS is being fixed and that we know that the antenna data is being uploaded. But then we get absolutely nothing, no GPS fixes, no antenna data for large chunks of time, and then those chunks of time become longer and longer. So this is going to relate to a power problem. That means we have some issue with the power supply. This is an example of a solar setup, and there's a couple different problems that this could be. The first could be a bad battery that is slowly not being able to be charged again, or it could be the fact that the solar panel itself is not facing the correct, the best, most optimal direction, and therefore it's not charging the battery well. Or weather is there's problem with the wiring. So this is an indication of a power issue if you're getting neither. It could also be a connection issue, but typically, if you should still get data once it is connected. So if there's a period of time that is just missing chunks in between two sets of data, that's not a connection problem. That is most likely a power problem. So doing this, just going online, looking at your project, looking at your receiver timeline, can automatically tell you a couple of things before you even go out there, and maybe give you a sense of what you should be looking for to fix when you're there. So that's a good way to start. So that's before we go out. And now we go out and it's time to check 5 main sort of areas that we're going to focus on. The first on our station is we're going to be checking the structural safety, so the structural integrity of the station, the actual brackets that it's attached to, the towers, the masts. If it's a guide roan tower like this example, we won't be checking the guy lines, we won't be checking the anchors. Of course, this is going to be very specific to whatever your setup is. If I am on a fire tower, there are specific things I'm checking for. The actual, if I have an external mast on that tower, I won't be checking the integrity of that and the bolts that are attached to the tower. Of course, if I have a guide roan tower, there's several more things that I need to be checking. It all depends on whatever your setup is. You need to be familiar with the things that you're going to be checking. The actual telemetry itself, so checking the antennas and the conditions of the coax cables. The enclosures that our receiver is going to be held in, the actual receiver itself, and sort of the software that goes along with that. And then our power supplies and making sure whether it be a solar setup or if we're just plugged into direct 12-volt outlet, no matter what the case is, checking that our power is working in the wiring that goes around that. So that's boils down to the 5 main things. We're going to kind of go through each one. So the first is the structural safety, and these are typically the most obvious. If I go up to a station and the mast is broken in half, well, obviously we know that our station's not going to be working properly. So things that we need to commonly be looking for: rust is a big one, whether that be on the actual nuts and bolts or on the mast or on any metal piece that we're using. Check for rust. Also looking at how vegetation is affecting it. Guy lines is a big one. Again, if you have a guide roan tower, checking the structural integrity of that. Again, it's all tied back to, is it upright? Is it in the right position? Is it sturdy? Has it been lasting through different weather? And then here we list a handful of tools, and I listed a bunch of tools sort of along the way. I won't go through all of them, but ideally when you go and visit, it's good to have a full toolbox with you. Just in general, the things that you would use for the actual installation, it's good to have with you for the maintenance, for being prepared to fix whatever needs to be fixed. That's sort of just be prepared, be a Boy Scout and be prepared, have your tools with you. So common solutions to a lot of our structural problems. First thing is use stainless steel hardware. That saves so much time and effort. And again, a lot of these solutions to problems kind of goes back to the origin of the actual installation. So when you're installing, think about the next 5 years. How do you want to be handling it? Yeah, it might be cheaper to not use stainless steel, but that investment's going to pay off by not having to replace nuts, bolts, guy wires, whatever it might be. And so that investment is worth it. Corrosion inhibitor spray is very useful, both for like loosening bolts, but also just spraying it down when you're installing. And then again, specifically with guy wires and guide roan towers, is raising and securing your turnbuckles, getting them off the ground, getting them away from vegetation, all of those things. So again, structural integrity is very tied to however you have it set up. So it's not applicable across the board, but things that you need to, investigate. The actual telemetry of the station. So common issues that we're going to see when we go out. Damaged coax, that's a big one. Whether that be from wildlife, oftentimes from the coax not being secured properly and enduring some pretty bad weather. It can be typically a lot of times it's the actual connection itself. So the connection to the antenna or to our receiver can get rusted, or a break within the coax cables. Oftentimes we see bent or shifted antennas. So especially the antenna elements, if you're using some of the older style like DX antennas, they're a little bit more flimsy, and those elements can be bent pretty easily. And also, like, if our antennas themselves have shifted to a non-desirable direction, that might also be causing more noise, making sure that everything is secured that way. And then our driver element, which is what supplies power to the antenna, that is typically the source of a lot of our antenna problems, because the rest of the antenna is a structural property. The driver element is what kind of supplies power. So if there's been damage to that and the connection to the coax there, that is a common source of problems that we see for dealing with our telemetry problems. Again, I list a handful of tools here, things that, again, we encourage you to have on hand for any station visit. One thing that I'll mention is the antenna analyzer. For those who don't know, an antenna analyzer is something that you can plug in to the coax that connects to your antenna. So you can plug it in at the bottom. And the main thing we're interested in evaluating is what's called the standard wave ratio, the SWR, which is essentially just a way of saying how much information is being passed from my antenna to my receiver. And if it's not at the right ratio, that is going to kind of show us where there are problems, whether that be with the coax or with the antenna. And oftentimes, even if we check our Motus data, it's not going to show up whether or not that antenna is properly working. And so antenna analyzers are extremely useful. I use them. And again, they're going to be able to show you problems that you more or less would not be able to really tell. So I encourage folks, especially if you have multiple stations across a state, I highly encourage you to get one. They are a little expensive. They're somewhere between $300 to $500, depending on which ones you use. So they're not cheap. So maybe if you have one station, it's not really worth the investment, and maybe try to find someone who has it. But this is a tool that I use very frequently, and it has helped me diagnose problems very, very well. So highly recommend that. Okay, solutions to our actual telemetry problems. This is a big one. Use hose clamps instead of zip ties when tying down your coax cables. I know traditionally a lot of people will use zip ties to secure them to the brackets, to the mast, to the towers, however it be. Use hose clamps. It's slightly more expensive, at $20 to $40, but again, zip ties and in the best case are going to last a year to two. If you're on the coast, they're going to last a year. So we use these. They're going to last forever. You're not going to have to worry about your coax breaking free and then whipping in the wind and breaking. And it's just much better than zip ties. We are also recently have been using Loctite on our antenna screws. So a little bit of Loctite adhesive onto the screws that connect the actual elements to our antennas. That's been useful in terms of just securing our elements. And then we will also recommend, things like using conduit to cover our cables, especially if it's close to the ground, close to vegetation. That can help protect the integrity of our coax cables. Power supply, again, all dependent on if you're connected directly to solar or sorry, if you're directly connected to a 12-volt outlet or if you have a DC solar setup. But things that you still want to commonly check is the loose and chewed cables, whether again to an outlet, to a solar panel. With problems with solar, you're going to experience aging batteries that have succumbed to really extreme weathers, extreme cold, which we don't have too many extreme colds until we get up into the higher elevations. But extreme heat can be a problem along the coast. And also, like I said, poor solar charging, so problems with the actual solar panel itself. This one, again, general tools to keep in mind, but also a multimeter is really not handy to have to make sure that you're getting the right voltage to your sensor station. And again, there's not the solutions here are pretty straightforward in terms of just ensuring that you're attached to reliable power and constantly checking your batteries, especially over time in a solar setup. If it's connected via cell data or Wi-Fi at that point, again, really easy to go in and check to see sort of how if you're experiencing any loss of power problems. The enclosures that hold our receivers and oftentimes the batteries and everything else that needs to be weatherproofed. These are going to experience wear and tear. They're going to succumb to vegetation, wildlife as well, as you can see in that older sensor gnome box setup that was devoured by something. I've heard stories of porcupines being really bad in the out west and in the northeast. So again, tie it all back to a matter of what did you install? What was the enclosure that you used in the first place? Maybe a little bit more of an investment can be useful for the future, because our solutions are typically, maybe invest in a steel enclosure. The bud boxes that we use, the plastic bud boxes that we use for sensor stations have been really, really good. Pelican cases for sensor gnomes are commonly used, and those have been also pretty useful. But these steel enclosures, yeah, they're going to be more expensive, typically $150 to $250, depending on if you're getting a larger enclosure to hold a battery. But we highly recommend it. This has been my go-to for battery installations now, and even just any outdoor installation that has, say, we use a surge protector, a larger Amazon battery backup and surge protector. And so we can house that within one of our smaller steel enclosures. And that's been really useful. So the steel enclosures are going to last a long time. Bud boxes are also going to last a good time. So, keeping track of that, raising enclosures off the ground, making sure they're not just sitting on the ground can help prevent a lot of these water damage and wildlife damage as well. And then finally, the actual receivers themselves. So here we're gonna want to make sure that we're familiar with the interface. We want to be comfortable being part of the actual, logging on to the interface and being able to just look at pretty broad data. I'm not going to dive deep into data management today. That is another talk that we'll give maybe sometime later this year. So this is really just about looking to check to make sure that our systems are working properly. So the things that you want to kind of check off your list, whether it be a sensor station or a sensor gnome, I'm going to kind of talk about both. The things you want to check off your list to make sure that are working. One, make sure that it's on and actually operating properly. If you go to your sensor station and it's turned on, but it's got a blank screen, LED screen, and nothing's working, there's a problem there. If you have a manual download data, a manually downloading station, make sure to download that data. If you have a sensor gnome, you take the SD card out and you download that data. If you have a sensor station, you can either download it through the interface. There's a download option through the interface, or you can use a USB drive to manually download. The next thing, and again, this is like what I want to emphasize to everyone who has a receiver, is to update your software. There is a more recent disk image for sensor stations that was released back in November that has fixed some pretty critical bugs on our sensor stations. And so if you do nothing else this year to maintain your stations, please go to your sensor station and reflash it with this newest disk image. That'll make sure that it is running smoothly for this upcoming year and is collecting data properly. I will, again, I'm not going to go through how to do that. It's a relatively straightforward process. There's a document that I will share with everyone. I'll send that out after this on how to reflash your disk image. Same with sensor gnomes. There's a newest version 2 software that we want all sensor gnomes to be running on. It makes for a really useful interface. And so that has a very similar process. You reflash it with a Raspberry Pi imager, just like you would with a sensor station. And again, there's a video that Adam made that I will, again, supply everyone that walks you through how to do that. It's very useful. Again, so making sure that our software on all of our receivers in the Southeast are up to the latest update, that will be very useful. And then the last thing you want to check as you're kind of going through your checklist is making sure that whether it's connected wireless to Wi-Fi, whether it's connected to cell data or to Ethernet, we want to make sure that it is indeed properly connected and uploading data. And if it is connected, it's not manual. Again, checking beforehand, looking online, checking to make sure that data has been uploaded, and you can see that, useful. Immediately tells me, yes, it is connected. No, it's not connected. Okay, so connecting to your receiver, if you have a sensor station, the way you do this is you can either use it directly using a USB to Ethernet adapter, and you connect to your computer. This is a very reliable way. If the sensor station is connected to Wi-Fi, you can connect to that IP address by, again, going through the menu to wireless and an IP address, and you can connect on your browser. But otherwise, you connect with a USB Ethernet adapter. You go to your whatever browser you use, and you can type in sensorstation.local, and that will get you to the sensor station interface. For sensor gnomes, again, if we are using the most recent version 2 software, it makes for a really nice interface where all you have to do is with a phone or a computer, whatever you have, once you're close to that sensor gnome, it's going to give you a Wi-Fi option that is SG- whatever the ID is. You connect to that, throw in a password, and then you can just interact through that interface on your whatever device you're using. So that is a very easy interface to use. Make sure you have that software. So the sensor station interface, again, I'm not going to go into detail about data management here, but just, again, broad things that we want to check for to go through. We want to make sure that all of the information at the top is correct, our sensor station ID. We want to make sure that our reboot schedule has been, we want to make sure our sensor station is rebooting properly, because that kind of helps also clear out any problems with antennas and bugs. The newer interface is going to show something slightly different, but our internet gateway will have a Wi-Fi signal strength, or if it's cell data, it's going to show you cellular data strength. Again, all making sure it's connected. And then making sure that our GPS is producing lat, long, and altitude fixes. Um, Something that I haven't really mentioned that you should bring with you if you have to all your maintenance visits is a test tag. Um, it would be extremely useful to have a test tag to walk around with both a 434 test tag and a 166 test tag. Make sure it's being picked up on your interface and you can see, okay, yes, my receivers are working, my antennas are working, it's picking up tags. For 434 tags, this live tags tab is where you will find it. So that is where those live tags will show up if you have them turned on and pointed at your antennas, and your antennas are working properly. Uh, More importantly, the sensor gnome interface with our 166, that's where there's a few more things, few more metrics that we're interested in knowing about live. On the left is the sensor station, sensor gnome interface. I know that's a little confusing. If you scroll down on the sensor station interface to look at our 166 data, there's a big red button that says sensor gnome interface, and this is what will pop up. If I'm logged in if I have just a actual sensor gnome and I'm connecting via the version 2 software via Wi-Fi, this is what it's going to look like on the right-hand side. And again, they're more or less showing very similar things. We're looking at that live stream of pulses, and that is our 166 detections. So the vast majority of it is going to be noise unless you have a test tag lying around. And so the first thing we want to do is check for noise. Again, I'm not going to go too deep into noise because that was the last presentation, but you're welcome to go check out that other video on YouTube. But this is where we're going to be inspecting to make sure we're not getting too much noise. One way we can definitely tell is we can see if data is constantly streaming in, specifically from one antenna. So in this scenario, port 4, so whatever antenna is plugged into port 4, P4, is producing a lot of data. It's low background noise at -78, -81 decibels, but it's constantly streaming in. So that tells us that it's problematic. It is producing noise. So our solution is to either remove that antenna or redirect that antenna away from whatever noise source could be causing it. So using our sensor gnome interface to evaluate noise, very important. But we also want to check to make sure that our fun cubes are working properly, that basically all the data is being received properly. The way we do that, again, you scroll down past the live pulses on, and here we're looking at, again, situation where we have 4 166 antennas plugged in. So you see USB port 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the things we're interested in is the first is the hardware and the plug-in frame rates. We want them to be around 48 over 48. This is more or less, again, information being received and it's a power supply problem. So in this scenario where we see the hardware frame rate dropping to 42.8 on a couple of those, that would be problematic. That number will kind of bounce around typically around 47, 48. Sometimes it will hit 49. And so the more antennas you have, typically the more problems you'll have with the frame rate. So if you're dealing with just 2 antennas, hopefully that shouldn't be a problem. But again, we want to make sure those are working properly. That could be a problem with the fun cube, could be a problem with your power supply. Yeah. And then the other thing we want to check for is that long-term detection rate, the pulses per minute. We don't want that pulse per minute to be more than 60 to 100 pulses per minute, because that means there's a pulse coming in every second or more than every second. And at that point, for each of those ports, that again indicates that there's a noise source and it can be problematic. So those are generally the things we want to check to make sure that our sensor gnome portion of whether it be a sensor station or a sensor gnome are working properly. I know that was quite a bit to go through. Again, this is recorded, so hopefully if you have questions, you can either ask me or go back through it. But all of it really comes down to, again, being familiar with the receiver you have. Like I said, I'm going to have more talks about um, on more data management things, but that's the sort of the general things to inspect. So again, our maintenance visit as we go, inspecting the actual structure, confirming that, making sure that our equipment is working, that our telemetry equipment is working, coax is fine, and making sure that we are collecting records as we go. And the best way to do that is to be able to work through our survey 123 that Todd so graciously made for the Northeast Motus collaboration. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to let Todd take over. And he is going to walk everyone through the survey 123. So Todd, take it away.
Thank you, Garrett. Yes, there's a lot to see there and a lot to keep an eye on, but fortunately, we've got a survey. Let's bring it up here. So this was essentially just a way to digitize what we had been keeping on paper forms, which were handy because you could send them around to somebody who might be checking on a station for you. You could just say, hey, go fill this out for me, take me some pictures. And now you've got a sense of what's going on at your station. But being able to digitize that, keep everything in one place is really handy. Survey 123 is an app that's part of the ArcGIS sort of ecosystem. And so it's built to work very directly with maps. I think a lot of people may have used them in the past, so hopefully this looks pretty similar to you, pretty familiar to you. I've got this app loaded on my computer here. Often when I'm out in the field, I have this on my phone and a tablet that I use as well. That's really handy because it'll ask you to take pictures, and if you can just take your pictures straight away with whatever device you're working with, it'll load right into the survey and you'll have everything there. Um, if you want to just take notes while you're out in the field and then come back and do it at a desktop back in the office, that totally works as well. Um, so when you first download the app, you'll need to sign in to the Northeast Motus collaboration user in order to reach both of these maps. And that is something that was sent around a little while ago, but I think we'll send it around again. There's a PDF that kind of lays out everything that I'm going to run through here, as well as your login and username and password and that sort of thing in order to get into it. But once you download it, you'll need to sign in, which is pretty straightforward. And then you'll have to download the correct survey. And Powder Mill uses this survey for a lot of things. I should say that this was created by the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, not myself, and it's hosted by them. And so it's really gracious for them to do that for us. And you can see here, NEMC site inspection, and then a date. That's the one you want. And you can see that I've already downloaded it with our little arrows there. And once you download it, it'll pop up here. Click in, go to the inbox, and you'll see all of your stations listed here. There's 277 of them now with the Southeast, and so it'll take a second, but there they all are. You can order them by distance, by alphabetically, however you want to find your station. Once you find which station you want to look at, you can click on it, click edit, and the survey should load. The survey is interactive, so it's not going to show every question all at once. It'll only show you the questions that you need, depending on what you input. So always start from the top and just make your way down. Certain things will be automatically input, such as the date and the time that you opened the survey and the site that you selected. Project manager, this is just an organization that is in charge of maintaining the station, whether it's ABC or somebody else. There's always an other option Same with technician, just to get a sense of who's out here. And if you do choose other, you'll have an opportunity to put in your name if your name isn't already in the drop down. Purpose is your visit. Wow, what are we doing here? And then you can start prompting with photos. Certain things are necessary. So anything with that asterisk, it's not going to let you upload the survey until you've got these photos. So you definitely need a photo of the station, a photo of the antennas. I like to take this antenna photo from directly below so that you can see which angle the antennas are facing, and you compare those over time to see if they've moved around or not. So you make your way along answering your questions. What does everything look like? What type of tower do we have? And then depending on which one of these you choose, the inspection questions will change a little bit. And so it'll prompt you to look for different parts of whatever that station build might be. And then always with a place for notes at the bottom and more photos. The photos are really helpful, especially if you're somebody who's remote, then checking on this months later to try and troubleshoot a problem, to be able to look back and see how things looked. Likewise with your power source. Different questions will pop up depending on what you choose. Your container, how are things looking there? Do you need to replace your container? Do you need to replace your locks? More place for photos. You'll see there's some specific answers in here, and those are things that we used in the Northeast. And so it made sense for us to have those specific answers. But again, there's usually an option for other, there's usually a place for a note if you've got some other situation. And then the last bit that pops up is your receiver type. And these are kind of the internal things that Garrett showed at the end of that talk. You can take screenshots of the various interfaces so that you can take all those screenshots and see if your tags are being detected, see if it's got the proper GPS and everything like that, and upload those screenshots directly. And then at the bottom of your survey, you can check which status you want this to be. This will determine what shows up on the map, which I'll show you in a moment. And just by hitting these circular buttons on the side, it'll drop down. So there's today's date. And so it'll automatically fill in. This station has been checked on today's date and it is connected. I'm going to close out of that and just closing. Obviously you can save this survey if you need to go back and again and do something, but I'm just going to close out of that one. And so all of this goes into feeding a maintenance map that looks like this. Likewise, on ArcGIS Online, you can use the same login credentials for the Northeast Motus group. It'll take you to this group with this GIS group with two maps. One is the editor and one is the viewer. The obvious difference is that one is you're able to edit it on the desktop and the other one is just for viewing. So if you want to share this with somebody who's just going out and doing site visits for you, but you don't need them to be able to change all of the data on the backside, then you can just send them the link to the viewer. But we're going to go into the editor here. And now you can start to see where all of this data starts popping up. Let's see. Jugan, that's a good one. So these stations, we've had a lot of these input. So there's some of the existing Southeastern stations are there, but this is where you'd be able to add a station just by selecting edit. And you can choose what way your station wants, whether it's connected and where you want it to be. And then I would suggest you're seeing a couple things here. So there's a lot of the receiver metadata here and a lot of the station metadata of where it is, what it is. Here's all of your antennas. Which direction are they facing? What color are they coded? And so all of the basic metadata that you might want to know when your station is installed. And then at the bottom of this, you'll have all of your inspection forms. which will be input as they go, as they come in. Let me get out of the editor for a second here. So if you're someone in the office and you want to check back and see what that last site visit looked like, here's all the answers from when I was out there in the end of May. And then all the way down at the bottom, you'll see all the attachments. So these are all the photos that I took. And so if I want to go and see what this station looked like in May, I can. So this is the sort of thing, well, I'll check this first as I do my sort of weekly or monthly run across the network to see if everything's working correctly. And if anything needs to be addressed in the field. Green means everything's good. Yellow, keep an eye on it. There might be a data issue. There might be a power issue. There might need an upgrade. And red, that's a station that is not sending data to the network at the moment, and so that needs to be addressed. And so I might go into here. If there's any notes to be made, here's one, a yellow station. I make a note, replace that with a steel enclosure. Just so I know what needs to be done in the future. And then when I get around to going to this station in the spring, I know what needs to be done. And it's a good way of communicating between yourself and techs, and if you're part of a group that's maintaining a station. But I'm going to wrap it up there. We'll send around a PDF that's got a lot of the how and the what and where all of this stuff is, as well as how to do more of those edits on the map to add your own station and put in your metadata and that sort of thing. But hopefully this is a useful tool. And if you have any questions about it, reach out to me. I've been using it for a couple of years up here in the Northeast. And so I've probably run into most of the issues that you've run into.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. Yeah, this is an extremely useful tool, and like Todd said, we'll send out all the information on how to use it. It'd be great to have everyone using that survey, and makes life very easy for maintenance visits. All right, I'm gonna stop recording.